Welcome into the PFF podcast. Steve Palazzolo here, along with Sam Monson. We have a very special series that we're going to unveil. Starting today, we're going to dive into the history of PFF, which is a little bit more than just, I think, a history of the company. I think there's a lot of interesting moving parts from our founder, Neil Hornsby, to our new current owner, Chris Collinsworth. A lot has happened along the way, and Sam and I will kind of take you guys through the story, take you through the different steps along the way, and the cast of characters. You know, I think every office maybe has, you know, their own little cast of characters. We'll give you guys some insight into ours because it's not always clear to the public the different types of interesting people that we have here in the company. So, Sam, this will be a fun little journey as we go back to the early days of PFF. I don't even know what the year would be that we consider the very beginning of PFF. Do you know what the exact year is? This is the type of stuff we have to pull out of Neil. But what year would you say PFF was born? Do you have a feel for that?
I mean, I think he first started doing something like serious in like 05, 06. I think the first year we started doing anything major in terms of grading was 08. And then 09 were the first kind of serious seasons where we were trying to keep pace with an NFL season, and then, you know, quicken the pace every single year after that. The important thing here, though, is that we're getting it all down because this is where we option the movie rights. This is our ticket to millions. We're going to
the oral history of PFF that somebody can pick it up.
We're putting it down on audio form so that Hollywood can come calling, and we'll be there to answer the phone call.
Who plays Sam in the PFF movie?
Well, look, I don't think we need to get too into that, but we all know that Brad Pitt's not doing anything right now, and that seems like an obvious fit to me.
Yeah, he's got some, alimony. He's got something to pay, right?
Yeah, exactly. He's got bills to pay.
Maybe that's the part for him. So yeah, maybe Brad Pitt for Sam. Unfortunately, Andre the Giant passed away. I thought he could play me pretty well.
He'd have had to go on a major diet to get that done.
Yeah, he's a little bigger. He's a little bit wider than I am. But yeah, this is going to be fun. It's a little bit of nostalgia. It's a little bit of, honestly, I'm interested in learning a lot of stuff as well. And when we do get Neil on the call, I'm going to dig a little. I'm going to try to dig deep. I'm going to interview Neil and try to get some of the dirt for the people out here, because there's a lot. Neil is I don't want to say complicated character, but there's a lot that makes him tick, and I think that'll be an interesting, discussion, digging into some of the stuff that made PFF come off the ground, because he calls it a hobby. Sam, we went from Neil's hobby of football over in England to now working with 27 NFL teams, closing in on 30 NFL teams. Let me ask you this. First off, what year did you join in, and did you have any idea that it would grow to the point that it is now, that we have this new award-winning podcast and millions of listeners and 30 NFL teams about to use all of our stuff? Did you see that type of future growth?
Well, this is the really interesting thing. When you talk to Neil, the most interesting part is going to be getting the early history, because it was a hobby. I mean, it started off as Neil's hobby, and it transitioned somewhere along the line from a hobby into a legitimate business and something that had the potential to pay off big. And, the early years of that are really interesting. You've been around since what, 2011 was when you came on?
Yeah, 2011, just before the season, I joined the player participation team. We'll talk about that whole entry-level deal, but yeah, it's been 2011.
So there's a few years between, I mean, even me and you, there's 3 years worth of PFF between the two of us that you weren't a part of. Before me, there's, or admittedly a lot less, but there's a limited time of PFF that didn't have me involved, that had other people doing stuff. Ben was the first kind of analyst in the door, but even before Ben, there'd been Neil working with Ian, the IT guy, and all sorts of stuff getting done kind of on the back end before that. So those first early seasons or early years and months of PFF are going to be really interesting to get the full history of how this went from a guy just screwing around with an Access database on his own to actually building something that was capable of producing all of these stats and the grading and all that kind of stuff. So I was actually looking around recently for some information for my long standing visa saga to try and get into the country.
That's a whole separate podcast.
Yeah, it's its own show. And I was trying to look back for basically the earliest proof I had of involvement with PFF, and I found stuff going back to 2008, and it wasn't even, I don't think it was during the season 2008. I think it was like, middle of the year sometime, off season, where I was doing the previous season's games or some grade, 2007 grading or something like that. So I started off sometime there just doing the odd game, Neil had got Ben on board. He was looking for a couple of other people to kind of help him out with the grading. And we all met through an online, like a chat room, basically, the NFL UK official website.
Like all great companies, met in a chat room.
Yeah, met in a chat room. That's how they all start. It's your new, high school or, friend's garage. It's now an internet chat room. It's just the modern way of things.
And you could expand where you pick people up from. So it's a bunch of guys from England, and they snuck, a guy from Ireland in there as well.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. So we all knew each other through this forum. Neil was just asking around for people that had some free time, wanted to help doing some of this stuff. And I was one of the guys that came on, started helping do these games. And the first thing we start doing was a thing we call player participation, which was really the bedrock of everything. In order to grade how a guy does throughout a game, you need to know how many plays he was on the field for, because otherwise a grade it doesn't have any context. Did a guy do that on 3 snaps or did he do it on 53 snaps? There's a big difference. So Ben, I think, was the first guy who came to that realization, invented player participation, and immediately passed it off to somebody else. I think Ben is the one person to come into this company amongst the kind of core guys who never did any PP. Ben just That was the only way into the company. Yeah.
People ask me all the time, how do I get into PFF? How do I do this? I have an analytics degree. I was like, look, all you need to do is chart where everybody is on the field to 99.2% accuracy, and that's it. And you're good.
Yeah, that was our
There's no degree.
Thing. And Ben was the only guy that never did it because he invented it and then immediately dumped it off on other people.
That's a power move by Ben.
Yeah.
Got to appreciate that.
Absolutely. Genius. He did, in fact, learn how to do it, though. I think there are games somewhere in the database where Ben has had to PP them and spend an extremely long amount of time doing it.
We need to check his accuracy on that.
So I did that, was doing PP, eventually got to the point where I was sufficiently bad at PP that they made me an offer to move to the analysis side of things, which I initially didn't want to do, ironically enough. I thought the PP was an easier gig, didn't want to do the analysis side of things. Neil basically persuaded me that it was in my best interest to do that, and luckily I did, and moved on that way.
Neil has a way of persuading, and when he says it's in your best interest, it's like, look, man, if you want to move, if you're going to be with us, you're going to have to do a little bit more work. You're going to have to do a little bit more. I feel like that's a common conversation with Neil as our boss. But let me back it up just a little bit. You talked about this UK chat room. So who are the cast of characters here? It's you, Ben Stockwell, Khaled, and Neil. Was anyone else involved, or was it just those 4? You guys were kind of like the 4 core analysts when I came on board.
Yeah, so that was our early group, along with Ian, the IT guy, who didn't...
And by the way, I'm going to talk to Ian. We're going to interview Ian. We're going to get 5, 10, 15 minutes. Ian, this is my favorite part of the story. Ian literally knew nothing about football.
Oh, no, nothing.
And right now, in 2017, knows very little about football. He knows a lot more, but I think the most fascinating part of the entire story is the fact that Neil taught someone who does not know a thing about football, but he taught him how to program all of this stuff and to write code for all of this stuff. I mean, he had to be like, hey, there's 11 guys on one side of the ball and there's 11 on the other side, and here's what they're called. I mean, he had to start from bare bones. It took probably just ridiculous attention to detail to to get Ian up to speed.
Yeah, that must have been a fun process. I mean, Ian was the one guy that didn't come from that NFL UK forum. Ian and Neil knew each other through their regular work, which was, Neil was a project manager, I think a business consultant, something like that. And Ian was an IT guy that he used in the past, that he'd done work with. So that's how those two got hooked up. So Ian was the kind of technical resource who, created the first website, the premium stats that you guys may have used in the past. And then myself, Ben, Khaled, and Neil were the football resource. We were the guys that were doing the bulk of the analysis and a lot of the PP as well. And then we had other guys that were doing bits and pieces of PP and helping out there.
Now, I heard some stories about your exploits on the chat, in the chats, on the website, on this NFL UK website. Were you not banned multiple times from this website? Is that true?
I was banned multiple times from the NFL UK website. Then for some reason, I can't even remember why, but the bulk of people from that site migrated to a different site with more or less the same name. So instead of NFL UK, it was UK NFL. And I wasn't allowed to join the second website because of
that's great.
the amount of people I pissed off in the first one. So rather than take that, what we did is I got signed up under a pseudonym, as opposed to the other like everyone was using pseudonyms anyway, but it was, a different pseudonym, a different handle. So I went into the second one illicitly, stayed there. I don't know how long I was in there before eventually cover was broken. I was made, and it caused a giant shitstorm. Like one person, I think, flounced out, left the whole thing in disgust that I'd been allowed in the second website after, so many people had decided it wasn't a good idea. Yeah, so that caused quite the drama.
So now you've evolved, you've grown as an analyst, and now instead of pissing people off in forums, you just do it on Twitter. So that's great. It's good to see that not much has really changed. You mentioned player participation as our entry-level work, and then you evolved into analysis, which, of course, is the play-by-play grading. And, we all go through this extensive training to get up to that analysis point. But player participation really is that is the entry level. That's where now I'd say about 95% of our full-time employees have come through. We've brought a few people from outside the company. Not including like a marketing team and other people like that, but only a few people have joined PFF without the pleasure of doing player participation. Now we have all sorts of other processes that you can kind of get your foot in the door, but it's basically the completely objective data collection is crucial. And at the time, the NFL was they were not giving player participation like they are now with box scores. So it actually was important just to have that data, but also the way we kind of fuel the grades. Now, the other thing that I thought was great when I joined was Skype. And we're doing this podcast through Skype because you're overseas. And that's become our office, essentially. The PFF office lives on Skype. And even now, when we actually have an office in Cincinnati, still much of the communication, because you're still in Ireland and we have people in England, we have people in the Ukraine. Where's Zoltan? Hungary. We have people all over the place. So Skype is our virtual office. How did you get stuff done just over Skype? Is that was pretty much the only contact you guys had once the company came together, correct?
Yeah, I'm trying to think when we actually started using Skype, and I can't remember, but I can remember predating Skype. I can remember when we used to be using MSN Messenger, and that was how everybody communicated. At some point, we must
AIM? Were you guys on AIM back in the day? AOL?
No, I don't think it was AIM. I think it was MSN Messenger. I don't know if all these things were linked, but there were a bunch that seemed to kind of be, interchangeable. I know I was definitely using MSN for a decent period. Maybe they all kind of communicated together, but
I don't know. Post on each other's MySpace pages when you were starting PFF?
Yeah, at some point we must have made the leap across to Skype, but I can't honestly remember that happening. We missed a trick all the way through this process. We should have been getting sponsored by Skype. Those are like like you say, they became the virtual office. That's how we all communicated, with Skype chats for each different kind of section or group or whatever it is we were working on. Even now, Skype, each game that we work on gets its own dedicated Skype chat where all of the different components and processes come together and are able to communicate with anything that's happened, from video to, errors or glitches or whatever it is we come across. So yeah, Skype has really been the bedrock of PFF communication.
Yeah, right now, I think in a given day, I'll have between 20 and 30 Skype chats that are live. And then in season, you and I personally have the pleasure of being in pretty much every Skype chat. So every game. Well, I'm on the college side. I get every college game too. You get every NFL. Every college game has its own Skype chat. So I get updated every time there's communication in there. But it's been a pretty good streamlined process. Along the same lines, now, I think everybody who doesn't know Neil will get a pretty good picture of the kind of boss that he is and all that as we go. But one of the questions I'm going to ask everybody here is, what is the first thing that comes to mind when you see on Skype, Neil Hornsby is calling? Because given his insane attention to detail to every part of the business, no matter what it is, a lot of the times when you see Neil Hornsby is calling, it's for a very, very specific reason. So what goes through your head when you see that? When sometimes it's once a week, sometimes it's once a day. When Neil Hornsby's calling on Skype, what's going through your head, Sam?
Well, it depends whether I know what he's calling about. So if something
sometimes you get that heads up, yeah.
Yeah, if something has happened recently and that's going to set him off, then the initial reaction is like, oh God. And then you just have to, you get him on the phone, you have to find out what's going on, you have to set him down occasionally. If you don't know what it is he's calling about, then it's more, this is unlikely to be good. Just the balance of probabilities. It's usually something that is going to make your day worse, or at least more inconvenient, or involve more work, or there's, it's very, very rare that he's calling up.
All of the above.
Yeah, to impart some beneficial aspect of something to your day.
Yeah, I'd say 9 out of 10 times, oh God, oh shit. Yeah, that's generally the reaction. And then 1 out of 10 times, it's like, hey man, whatever you just did was good job. Just wanted to call and say good job. You get like 1 out of 10 where he just surprises you, with, hey, that was really good. Keep that up. And it's not that he doesn't like positive reinforcement. He's all about that. But generally, because his attention to detail is great, you get that attention to detail. Ben during the season feels the brunt of it. I think in the off season, you and I feel the brunt of it quite a bit. So again, the virtual office, and I live right down the street from Neil, but it's still the Skype call. And so he lives in the States now, and he could easily call my cell phone. We're in the States. Skype initially existed because you're going cross country and cross the ocean and all that stuff. Like, I have a cell phone. Neil has my number. He can call me, but still, it's over Skype for the most part. And you generally don't have a positive reaction when he's going to call you.
Yeah, well, it's like I say, it's usually not good news. Every now and again, you'll be surprised and there'll be something nice, but most of the time, it's going to throw a spanner into your day.
So let me go back to your early days, Sam. What were you thinking throughout this whole thing? Why did you really get involved? How many games were you doing? And let me just, before we get into that, 2008 season was the first one that actually went up on the website, correct? So it's 2008. Yeah. Didn't Ben Stockwell, didn't he do all of those games? What was that? Did he just do every game by himself?
He would have done almost all those games. Yeah, I think Neil would have done a few. But I think in 2008, it was just the two of those grading games. I think we may have had one or two other people that were doing similar things to me in terms of helping out with the odd game here or there, who kind of helped out with a game. But yeah, it would have been almost 100% Ben and Neil that year.
And I can't wait to dive in with Ben, and we're going to get into the construction of the system. Where did the PFF system come from? Why is it 0.5 increments, plus twos, minus twos? We'll get into all of those details. But I think my favorite story is that Ben finished the 2008 season a week before the 2009 season started.
Yeah.
And then that was the first season you said you guys tried to keep up, right? You tried to go live
Yeah.
Were you still doing player participation then, or had you graduated to analysis?
Oh, we didn't even try to go live. We just tried to we just tried to finish 1 week by the time the next week started.
So vaguely try to keep up.
Yeah, exactly. Just try and not get behind the way we did before. Because, it was
first year of Game Pass too, I think, which made life a little bit easier. Is that correct?
Hugely, because before that, we were working from Neil snail mailing out DVDs of games to people. That was how those initial games were done.
That makes the story even better.
We would get packages through the mail of games from Neil. He had a whole system set up where he was burning DVDs, had a printing thing to stamp on I don't know, what do you call it, like a sticker to the top of these things, like an image sticker to show you what the game was, and you just get a batch of them through the post, and that was how you were doing your games.
This was 9 years ago, and it sounds like PFF started in 1955.
Yeah, I mean, that's how the system worked. It was insane that we got anywhere near all of it done.
So take me through, I need to know more about before I got there, 2009 and 2010. What was your role? How was it growing? How did you see PFF start to grow?
Yeah, so I mean, I went from the PP side of things. Then I got the offer that I couldn't refuse to move to analysis. So I was essentially the first trainee analyst. And unlike now, where we have the full analyst handbook and the guides and, a fairly set out structure of how this works and how best to teach people and all this kind of stuff, none of that. I got pretty much no training whatsoever. Ben,
that's good.
Basically just rolled through the system, told me roughly how it worked, audibly. And then I started doing games. and those games were horrendous. The first games were terrible. So what would happen is I would do a game based off this, a couple of hours of audible instruction and how the system worked. Anytime a weird play came up that hadn't been explicitly described to me, I would have to ask Ben on Skype how to deal with that. So I did these games, and then Ben would go through and he would check my grading afterwards. And then my training kind of finished when we reached a point in the season where Ben was like, okay, that's okay now. I'm not checking anymore.
You're good enough.
He would just go through and oh, that's terrible, terrible. Fix all this, fix all this, fix all this. And then you go back, and then the next game, and oh, terrible, terrible, fix all this. And eventually he goes, you know what, that's close enough. This one's okay. Now we're good. So yeah, that was my training system. And then
the thing about analysis is not only is it learning the proper way to grade players and what each scenario looks like and all these different things, but it's also a whole lot of data collection and saying, okay, this is a shotgun, this is this is that, this is the down, whatever we were collecting at that time. So, and there's a lot of just procedure and process. There's nothing worse. There's absolutely nothing worse in PFF than the end of the game play where there are 16 laterals because they all need to be entered in the system properly. So the challenge is as much in mastering the procedure and the process as it is knowing what you're looking for as far as from a football standpoint grading players. So I can imagine back then even how much worse it was for you.
But also, so in the early years when it was basically just me and Ben deciding how things should be graded, there's so much of football where it's something will come along every single year. Something comes along that you've never seen before. And you have to figure out what you do with that. So, you had the broad brush strokes in place, but then every single week there'd be something that comes up where me and Ben would have to decide, okay, what does that do? How do you grade that compared with, just this basic bog standard play? If that's worth a 0.5 because of this, what does this little wrinkle do to that grade? Is that better? Is that worse? So all the way through this, we would have to kind of game out how all these different scenarios would get graded. And that's how eventually it just got expanded and expanded to the point where Ben ends up, codifying the PFF analyst grading handbook or the whole process. So that's basically a product of these first couple of years where we were doing it on the fly and just figuring out how stuff should be graded as we went along. And then, occasionally tinkering with stuff where we decided, that's definitely not right. That's completely out of whack with the rest of this stuff. So those first 2 years were really interesting in terms of trying to figure that kind of stuff out.
Can we back up 1 second? Because what was Neil thinking? What was his, what do you think his motivation was, or do you know his exact motivation? Because I always describe him as the guy that's like sitting on his couch watching football and he's just like mad at the announcers, because everybody's mad at announcers, right? Phil Simms, our boss Chris, the announcers don't know what they're talking about. This guy's better than, what he's saying. This guy's not as good as they're saying. And everybody has those opinions, right? This announcer's wrong because my favorite player is way better than the announcer thinks. And then Neil just happens to be the guy that was like, I'll show them. I'll just grade every player on every play and prove them wrong. Whereas everybody else just goes about their business and says that announcer's dumb. Was it that? Was it the Pro Bowl voting? Like, what the heck was his motivation to get this whole thing started?
Yeah, I think it was that. I don't think it was even a case of, I'll prove them wrong, I'll show them. I think it was just, look, this is just guys taking a look at something and saying the first thing that comes into their head, whether it's right or wrong. Let's try and put some sense to this. Let's start going through a game and seeing if we can grade guys, and just putting plus or minus and seeing if this is good, or let's start putting some rhyme and reason to this, instead of just taking a look at a guy, well, that looks like a good block. This guy's one of the best in the league because he was a first round pick. That's bullshit. So instead of doing that, let's try and actually quantify some of this stuff. So I think really it just started like that. Neil wanted to put some numbers to this, went through and did a whole game. And then from that point, you're like, well, okay, now I need to do a team. Now I need to do a whole season. Now this has become a thing. This is taking on a life of its own, and I need other people on board to help do this because I'm just one guy with a limited amount of time.
Now, I do know that his inspiration for this was Dr. Z from Sports Illustrated, who would go through and kind of had his own grading system and always had different views from the masses, because he would go through and actually grade 5-10 games a week, whatever it was. Neil had a really nice article on MMQB a couple years ago, or last year maybe, honoring Dr. Z and essentially, giving him the credit for inspiring PFF. So I know that was his inspiration. I just didn't know what may have fueled his, motivation to, to really see the whole thing through. But that's another thing about
that's where it was a hobby. Like, this is where
right.
It starts off and you're fed up of listening to that crap that people trot out without any sensible backup or substance to it. So you start doing it yourself, and seeing if what you think is actually right, seeing if what you think whoever it is a better player than they're talking about. Let's start charting it. Let's start figuring it out. And that's better. So okay, now let's see how many of these I can do. And it was a hobby for him. He just started, and then eventually there was a point where we started to think, well, maybe there's value in this. Let's see if we can turn this whole thing into a business and some kind of realistic prospects at the end of it beyond the hobby.
Okay, that's a perfect segue, because one of the big things I wanted to hit was, I love it, absolutely love it, when people tell Neil that we can't do something or that he can't do something. I mean, if I was like, Neil, look, you can't fly to Mars this year. You just can't do it. He'd start figuring it out. He'd employ rocket science. He'd be looking into ways to make it happen. So that's, the first thing is, it sounds great. You're going to grade every player on every play, but especially we still deal with this today. How do you know the play call? How can you do that? You don't know what they're asked to do. You don't know what you're doing. You guys never played in the NFL. You never played beyond the Irish League or whatever you played in, Sam. How can you do that? And then in the early years, I know people were saying, you can't tell who's on the field. How can you do that off broadcast? You can't grade every player on every play. So how much of that pushback were you facing early on once this thing went public? How much has that evolved and changed? And any other story? What other things have people told Neil that he can't do that he just got so furious at that he made it happen?
Oh, there were so much. Like early on, the player participation was something that it was part of our offering. We would give you player participation data because it wasn't in the game books. The NFL teams didn't even have it for everybody else until I think they got it after the season. Maybe they got given it en masse the previous year's PP. I think that actually changed because we were putting it out there. But so early on, the player participation stuff was one of the things that everybody signed up to get. You know, who was playing, how much, where were they playing, what were they doing, all that kind of stuff. And so early on, a lot of the crap we were getting was because of that. It was, you know, how could you possibly tell who the safeties were in a given play, or how can you tell, you know, and all this kind of stuff. And one of my favorite criticisms, actually, there's a very prominent ESPN journalist who once said it was completely impossible to do what we were doing from TV broadcast, from TV copy without the All-22, because he couldn't tell what linebackers were on the field on his giant HD TV, you know, back in the day when HD TV was a big deal as opposed to just what everybody has. There was no 4K back then. But he, you know, that was
you guys were slumming it.
Couldn't tell what linebackers were on the field, and he had a big HD TV, so it's impossible to do what you're doing. But at the end of every season, we would get the NFL's data coming out, and we were able to cross-check that with our own data. And, you know, we were some ludicrous 99.7% accurate, something like that. Crazy levels of accuracy because we had instituted a system. We had double-blind player participation things. There was 2 passes of it, and the errors were compared against each other. And the bottom line is, you figured out very quickly when you're doing PP not to focus on the numbers, because numbers on jerseys will warp and they will look different and they will look like a different number that you know can't possibly be that guy. So I remember early on in my illustrious PP career, I had an offensive lineman, like some guard. I had him down as nose tackle for like 5 plays because I swear to God, it looked like number 69, but it wasn't. So you learn quickly to identify, you know, a different colored glove or an armband or the way a guy's ankles are taped or any one of dozens of things. Anything you can pick out that's unique to a player, that's what you're zooming in on. That's how you're IDing them. So that was our PP system, but we used to always get crap about, you know, you can't possibly do this. It's just not, you know, you can't find out. And really, you know, the safeties was a big one. But really, you had a handful of plays in a year where at no point did the safety enter the shot. And by that, I mean not just the TV, the 6 seconds where the play's going on. I mean like the next replay or the next shot that shows the sideline where you can see that guy running off the field, or
even,
you know,
or breaking the huddle. Even breaking the huddle. You have to be creative when you're trying to do player participation as far as finding the guys you need to find.
So there's like a handful of plays in a season where it's completely 100% impossible to tell if that guy is on the field or not. And even on those plays, you're doing better than guessing because you've worked out personnel group tendencies. So if it's nickel, the chances of them going with anyone other than the safety they've used in the same nickel package for the previous 50 plays is unlikely.
Right. Safety's not a readily substituted position like the defensive line.
Yeah.
You're not going to have a different free safety on every play. That just doesn't happen. You know, there's in like you said, if there were 3 guys rotating, it's like, all right, when they're in base, this is what it looks like. When they're in nickel, this is what it looks like, and that's usually basically it.
So even the ones where you 100% couldn't tell from the TV copy, you've got a pretty good educated guess on the guy that's going to be there based on what they've been doing the rest of the game.
Anything else that comes to mind? Because again, our whole existence has been a lot of people pushing back, saying you can't do this. And you know, when people said you can't grade every player on every play, you know, we found a way to do it. Neil found a way to do it. Then it's like, well, there's no way you could do this for college. And Neil's eyes light up, and he's like, "Oh, really? We can't do this for college?" And you know, his background is in. You mentioned project management. His specialty isn't really football; it's just putting process in place, right?
Yeah. Well,
so he's like, "All right,
that was his thing."
If we're gonna do this for college, we take what we're doing for the NFL, you multiply it by 4, and boom, that's it. And here's the process in place, and here are the steps we're going to take to get there, and that's it. Anything else that comes to mind where people just said, Neil, PFF, you guys are crazy, you can't do this, and his eyes light up, and he's just like, oh yeah, I'll show you, because that seems to be, you know, his motivation. You know, he always seems to be motivated by that stuff, and he always finds a way to make things happen.
I think probably the time scale and, you know, being able to get, so we, like I said, we started off and we'd finish one season by the time the next season started. Then we got to the point where we were able to just about keep pace with the season in terms of using up the whole week. And now we get everything up on the website by, 6 a.m. on a Monday morning, at least the first run of things. So we've gone from barely being able to keep pace in a week with the NFL to being able to put up almost everything we do hours after the game takes place. And, early in PFF, if you'd said that was a possibility to any of the guys that were grading in those first couple of years, we would have said that is completely ridiculous. That will never happen. Like, the best you'll be able to get out of us is, maybe midweek you'll be able to get all your data, but forget about first thing on a Monday.
Yeah, when I started in 2011, we got the last games up on Tuesday morning, I believe. And then I was doing player participation, and I would do a lot of second run player participation in that double blind. I would be like the second one, not the live one. And a lot of my games weren't due until Tuesday night or Wednesday, so we weren't really finalizing our player participation errors maybe until later in the week, or perhaps rolling it into the following week. And the whole process just got quicker and more streamlined as we added more manpower and took some games off of Ben Stockwell. Now, to grade a game, how long would you say it took you to grade a game? Doing the analysis, grading the players, collecting X amount of data before we added this new system. How long would you say it took you? Because I was in that 6.5 to 7.5 hour range.
Yeah, and
I'm slow.
In the old system, I was probably about, it depends on the game, but 6 hours would probably be a decent gauge for how I was doing in the old system.
So you were a little faster than me, and Ben was the fastest until Khaled took speed or whatever he does to do games even quicker. But Ben used to do how many in like a 36-hour period? Ben would do what, 5, 6, 7 games sometimes?
Ben would just kill himself in those early years, doing some ridiculous number of games by the end of Tuesday. It was insane. Like all of us were working crazy hours for those first few days of the week, but Ben would just rattle through games at some insane rate. He was taking like 4 hours basically was what he would take to do a game, and he would do game after game after game. It's one thing. It's the kind of thing that sounds really easy. If you try and concentrate on anything for 4 hours, it's doable. But by the end of it, you're spent. Like, you're done. Your mind is mush. It doesn't function anymore. So if you then go, okay, now do it again, and now do it again, like by the end of that period, you're like, and normal people are just fried. But Ben was doing that every week.
PFF Monday afternoons were always that, like, I'm about to hit the wall. Period, for me, at least for the early years, because you'd work Sunday, all day Sunday. I used to go to bed at 2 or 3 in the morning, wake up at 6, work all the way through, and like 3 o'clock hits on a Monday, and it's not your usual 3 o'clock that your 9 to 5ers feel. It's like, wow, I've just been working nonstop other than the 3 hours I took a nap, which was called sleep. And then you still have to work through Monday night and into Tuesday. So luckily, we've added enough manpower that we can, spread the wealth a little bit on doing some of those games. But let me go back to before I got there, 2009 and 10. Now, when did this stuff start to become public? When did PFF kind of get on the map? Was there like a day or something that happened where you said, okay, we're starting to kind of become a thing, or people are paying attention to us? Take me through some of that process.
Yeah, so it went on the website quite early on with premium stats and that kind of thing. And we would get bits and pieces. We would start getting, we would get excited when a beat writer would pick something up and, tweet about a bit of PFF, or not even tweet, this is before Twitter, write about.
On their MySpace page.
Yeah, a bit about, PFF stat point or a bit of data or a grade or anything like that. We used to have Google alerts set up that would inform us when someone had mentioned Pro Football Focus and that kind of stuff. And, so there'd be, every now and again, there'd be one of these come up and we'd get all excited and it would be great news and it would boost our profile a little bit. And obviously now, if you tried to do that, you would, like, your email would just explode from the mentions that come in. But yeah, there were bits and pieces. One of the things I remember that caused a real storm was it 2010 where we did our top 101 for the first time, and we had Tom Brady after was it an MVP season in 2010 where we had him ranked number 33 in the NFL. And this was at a time, which is most of the time actually, where you could say no wrong about Tom Brady, or anything that didn't proclaim him as the greatest human being to ever walk the planet would be met with significant blowback. So yeah, I spent the majority of Christmas, or the Christmas holidays at that time, on various New England radio shows trying to defend us ranking him 33rd for running one of those offenses where it was all just extended handoff stuff to Wes Welker and, the occasional bomb. It was, we basically graded other quarterbacks better despite him having the best statistics. And this was the first time that we had kind of come in a major way against the conventional wisdom in terms of what everybody else was thinking. This is something the data says it's pretty different. And we went out there and tried to defend it. And yeah, I've had more fun Christmases than that one.
You always seem to be at the center of a Tom Brady controversy, but yeah, it's funny because I was using PFF as a fan at the time, a year before I started with the company, and there was some merit to it. He had this 12-game or 10-game streak with no interceptions to finish the season, which was incredible. But I remember explicitly passes that he threw directly to Brian Urlacher that were dropped in the snow.
Yeah, that Chicago game wasn't good.
The Chicago game wasn't good at all. I mean, it was in the snow. But when you're talking about, hey, this guy's got 300 straight passes with no interceptions, and you just point to this one play, which is purely luck, it's like, all right, so does that stat even matter? Same thing happened. He threw one to Charles Woodson, I believe, against the Packers. So he had a couple lucky passes in there. It was definitely a short pass game centric. And so, yeah, I think he played well that year, but certainly not as well maybe as the stats would indicate.
It's all coming back to me now, like flashbacks. I'm going to have to go lie down. It's taking me back to dark memories.
2010 Brady, 2013 Brady's an even worse memory, Sam. We won't bring that one up. But that was one of the things that attracted me to PFF, I think, as a fan. And one of my early stories was also Patriots related. It would have been a 2010 game where I think, say, Gerard Mayo had 10 plus tackles. He was playing inside backer. Brandon Spikes was the inside linebacker next to him. He may have had 3 tackles. And I looked at the PFF grades, or at least the game recap, because I don't know if the grades were free that year. That's another story. But Brandon Spikes gets the highest grade, and you guys are writing him up. Brandon Spikes is outstanding, and he was blowing up fullbacks and taking out guards and freeing up Mayo to make plays. And that was one of the first times where I said, wow, these guys are really onto something, because I was just taken aback by the fact that somebody was trying to quantify how well guys were playing football, not just based off the stats. Because on the stat sheet, of course, Gerard Mayo's getting all the credit. Brandon Spikes, though, was the thumper, taking out guys and never losing blocks and opening things up for Mayo. That was one of the first times I remember there's some really good context in here that I think is just a different way of looking at football. And that's what, as a fan, attracted me to PFF for the first time. So I'm not just an analyst. I was a user as well. I was a fan before joining.
Yeah, and that was the idea in those early years, is to try and bring more context to just these box score numbers. Try and kind of come up with the but bit of information. So like I said, this guy had 10 tackles, but all of them were 15 yards downfield, so why is that a good thing? Or, this guy had 8 sacks in a season, but all of them were unblocked. All that kind of stuff. So we were just trying to add this context to these conversations. Or with the Tom Brady thing, he only threw 4 interceptions, had some ridiculous streak. Yeah, but there were 3 dropped interceptions in that. So again, we were just trying to add that stuff. But you mentioned there, you touched on it. I think it's worth getting into the story when we put premium stats behind the paywall for the first time, because that is how we got Steve Palazzolo on board.
Yes, it is. I was so furious, and I need to dig in, as I'm making fun of you guys for using MySpace and old stuff. I need to dig back into my AOL emails, because in my old AOL email account, or from my old AOL email account, I did send Neil some sort of hate mail when you guys actually put stuff behind a paywall. So 2010 was the first year it actually cost money. 2009, everything was readily available for the 2008 and 9 season, from player participation, including the spreadsheets. I used to print out these spreadsheets of player participation, which is insanity, but I used to love it.
Hard copy.
Because well, I like to print stuff out, see it in front of me, highlight, cross out. Love the hard copy. So you had player participation, and you had all of the grades and all of the signature stats. Everything was readily available and free. And then what happened in 2010? Because I was pissed off. I was a poor minor league baseball player who couldn't afford premium stats at the time. And I sent some hate mail to Neil. What happened that you guys had to start charging money? Obviously, there was a lot more traction behind all the numbers.
Yeah, well, I mean, we reached a point where we were starting to, Neil was starting to sink a lot of money into this, and there was nothing coming back. We weren't making money out of this in any way, shape, or form. We weren't generating advertising money. We weren't big enough to do that. We didn't have any big deals with anybody. We were trying to break into the NFL market. We knew that this thing was appealing to pretty much everybody, to consumers, to agents, to teams, to networks. We just hadn't got there yet in terms of being able to get their attention and being able to cross the hurdle in terms of how can this be legit? What do you guys know? So we needed to start generating some money, and we decided, okay, we'll put premium stats behind a paywall. And we really didn't want to do it. Me and Neil, I think, was one of the ones that really wanted this to be available to everybody, to raise the debate in terms of football and to have this information accessible to everyone. So the more kind of obstacles we put in the way of that happening, it wasn't ideal, but at some point we had to generate money out of this. So we decided we'd put it behind a paywall, and this was
best decision you guys ever made.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was the thing that allowed us to keep going, but it's also one of the biggest mistakes we ever made, because we didn't have a marketing department, we didn't have anyone doing research on this, so we just guessed how much we should charge for it. Who the hell knows? Like, what is this worth? So we had these kind of debates as to how much is it worth versus how much is anyone actually willing to pay for it. So year one, we were charging $90 for this thing, and
that priced me out.
It priced so many people out. In hindsight, it was incredibly dumb. I think, like, at the end of 1 year, I think we slashed it to like $30 or something. We at least cut it in half. We were just way over in terms of what we charged for it. And then we were kind of year on year trying to hack $5 off and trying to make it cheaper and cheaper to try and get it as accessible to as many people as possible. Before we reached the point where we were at now, which is the corporate deals, the deals with networks became a bigger thing. They became the thing that we needed to keep functioning so we could pay the army of people we have doing the data collection. So we had to we had to take away premium stats essentially, or shut it off for anyone except the really high price consumers, and try and come up with other things we can give people that we're trying to improve on as we go forward now. But yeah, that was, it was the one move we needed to make in order to survive, and it was also one of the biggest mistakes we've ever made as a company.
Well, I still think it was the best decision you ever made, because that is what brought me onto the company.
Yeah, I'm counting that as the mistake part.
Nah, I think you're missing out, because I'm the best PFF employee of all time, and I think there's no debate there. So that's what I was at a point in 2011 where I felt like I just needed this information so badly that I tried to join the company.
Yeah, I will say that
that's where I was.
I think that gave us that side effect. If it wasn't just you, I think that first wave of guys that we kind of brought in that way, I think we're almost all motivated by the same thing. They may not have been quite as direct about it as you were, but the idea was the same. It's shit, this now costs $90. I'm not paying that. I got to see if I can help them and get it from the inside. So I think you, Rick, Nathan, I think you all basically had the same idea, which is, I'm not paying that money, so let's see if I can get involved.
If you can't beat them, join them. That was definitely my take on it. And now look, you guys were trying to price out what this thing was worth, and we found out later this thing is worth tens and hundreds times more than what you were charging. So worth was not an issue. It's worth that much, but it was, at the time, it was how much people willing to pay.
And that's the thing. It's a different balance. Like you're trying to price what it's worth, but it doesn't really matter what it's worth. It's worth what someone's willing to pay you, or what the maximum number of people are willing to pay you. So it may have been worth more than what we were charging, but in order for us to actually make money out of it, given the number of people we had using the site, we needed as many of those people as possible to be paying for it, and so we're off in terms of price point of what those guys are willing to pay.
Right. So yeah, I mean, now we see that it's worth a lot more. We're able to put it, send it to different people or different organizations for a lot of money. But I think the good news is for especially our podcast listeners and those dedicated PFF fans through the years who loved some of the old stats and a lot of those things, we're making things a lot more affordable very shortly. I think as of now,
yeah,
PFF Edge, PFF Elite. Edge and Elite, get used to those names because they're bringing PFF back to, I think, the heart of what we are, and it's providing unbelievable value to the fantasy player, to an NFL draft fan, to just an NFL fan, to everyone listening here. So PFF Edge, PFF Elite are the two products that we've just consolidated so much of what we do into these two products so that the experience is a lot more streamlined and a lot more, you just get a lot more out of it, a lot more bang for your buck. So we're excited about that, and stay tuned over the next few weeks. We'll have a lot more information as to what those entail. But because I couldn't afford the stats at the time, I reached out in early 2011. I sent the simple email to Pro Football Focus that said, "Do you need help?" ? And that was it. That was the extent. And I got the email back from Khaled, and I had no idea that you guys were overseas. And when I first actually talked to him and he had this funny accent, I was like, oh boy, what did I do? Very similar to Chris's, Chris Collinsworth's initial interaction with Neil. But yeah, I just said, do you need help? And Kay emailed me back. He said, yep, always looking for help. And he sent me a practice game. And of course, the practice game is the dreaded player participation. But because I was not only an avid Madden player, but very, the Madden thing helped me because of player equipment and knowing team packages and all these different things, which helped my player participation work. But because I was basically watching football film as a hobby and just on the side, not getting paid for it, I took to player participation pretty well. Had a pretty good practice game. So this was in like August of 2011. I sent my first game in, and they were like, all right, you could do part-time. You could do games for us this year. We were getting paid by the game, and you had to get 99.2% accuracy to get the minimum dollar value, I think it was, per game.
Yeah.
To get the minimum value. So you get a different threshold if you were 99.5 and a different threshold if you were 99.7. So there was always obviously that motivation to do it right. I started out great, and then I just kind of leveled off. I was just an average player participation guy, I'd say.
Steve Palazzolo, merely average.
But I only did it for the 1 year. We graduated. Graduated in 2012 to become a full-time analyst. I was the fifth full-time employee of the company, or did I tie with Nate for 5?
Yeah, you may have tied with Nate. I think you guys came on the same time, didn't you?
Either way, most importantly, we were the first Americans. So we legitimized the company in 2012, added some Americans to the mix as full-timers. Rick was still part-time, I believe. Yeah, he was still part-time at that point.
Yeah.
So we were the first Americans. Really changed the company since 2012. It's been smooth sailing since, right, Sam?
Yeah, it's never been the same, really. And yeah, you're really the root of all the problems now that I think of it. Everything was going fine until you joined up.
Well, look, we needed to Americanize the whole deal, but for me, it's been amazing just watching everything grow. Of course, 2011 was the year that the New York Giants won the Super Bowl, acknowledged that there was some level of PFF data usage along the way, which we'll get into that story with Neil when we interview him. By 2013, was that the year we may have had maybe 5 or 6 NFL customers? And every time we added an NFL customer taking our data, it was like, wow, this is amazing. Teams are loving this stuff. Even though behind the scenes, we would talk about it and be like, teams would love this stuff. How do they not have all this information? And why are they not using it? And I think 2013, we were just scratching the surface. And then 14, 15, 16, you just continue to grow to the point where, yeah, we're closing in on all 32 NFL teams taking our entire database.
And there's the one person that's a huge part of that you're going to talk to in part of the interviews is Brian Hall. Brian was one of these guys that came on. Again, same deal, doing PP. He went through the analysis training, I think.
He was with me.
Yeah.
He was with me,
the
class of 2011.
Well, he went through the same thing, went to the analysis training. I think we decided that Brian wasn't really cut out for the analysis training side of things, but Brian is a salesman by trade. So Brian took it upon himself to be the salesperson for PFF and organize going after teams proactively and aggressively, as opposed to us, the 5 core guys that were there to begin with, just kind of vaguely, passively supposed to be involved in it somehow, but never really having time to do it. Brian carved that out, as a role, as a niche, as a job, and we owe a huge amount of our success to Brian right now.
We do. He's also a failed musician. We'll get into that as well, see if he sold any CDs along the way. But Brian, an interesting character. He looks like he's my age, which is 35. So it looks like when we came in, we were right around 30. Turns out he was really about 40, which was just mind-boggling to me. But we'll talk to Brian. We'll get into his story a little bit and how he's seen us grow from our first year at the NFL Combine, where we were like sleeping on floors and cots, to the point where, now we have a full team going down there to work with NFL teams. Other cast of characters, Sam, that we'll talk to. We mentioned Ian, and as our IT guy, Nathan Yonke, who is the most statty guy. I think when people think of PFF, sometimes they might envision Nate. They might just think of that must be what they are, right? Just a bunch of stat geeks. And that's what I say this nicely to Nate. Nate's the stat geek, right? He's the guy that dominates Excel slightly better than you. Can whip up numbers anywhere out of the database extremely quickly. Nate's our stat guy.
Yeah.
So we'll get into his story a little bit and where he came. Him and I came on at the same time. Gordon McGinnis, who's been, he's from Scotland and a guy who's done everything for us and now has become the special teams guru. And, he's worn many hats along the way. We'll get into his story. And then Rick Drummond, who I mentioned earlier, he came on as a full-timer after me, but as a part-timer what year was he on? Was he just after you? I mean, he jumped in and he's done everything at PFF.
No, I think he would have been just before you. I don't think he was on much before. I think he was 2010 maybe, because he was after we lost a couple of the guys who were doing the editing before him, just completely voluntarily. Rick joined on, was doing the regular stuff, but also took on editor-in-chief basically as like a side gig, because Rick doesn't
for no extra money, just a side gig.
Yeah, because Rick doesn't sleep. So Rick was able to do that, the time where normal people were trying to actually sleep.
Yeah, we'll get into Rick and his ability to get through the day with no sleep, and how bad he was at player participation, yet still move forward through the company, which is that is not the way to move forward at PFF.
No,
is being bad at player participation. Historically, that's the only way to move forward, and Rick somehow bucked the trend, but it was because he wore multiple hats and was able to do so much. He's done a lot through the years, and now he's your boss, Sam. He's your boss, so
and yours.
Mine too. But have some respect for Rick and his ascent through PFF. And then, of course, we'll talk to Mr. Chris Collinsworth, everyone's boss, the owner of PFF, and discuss the whole process that occurred back in 2014 when he subscribed to the site for $27 and then bought it for a lot more. So that whole deal was, a game changer for PFF. We'll get into his thought process and, what brought him to PFF, what inspired him to obviously get much further involved in PFF and try to take us, hopefully, to the next level. So I think this is going to be a lot of fun. A little bit of history, a little bit of where we are, a little bit of the future, and the cast of characters that have made it all happen. Sam, anything else that you think in this entire series will be of worth to people? I mean, we'll get into some other cool stuff as well that I think people will enjoy, but anything else that just kind of sums up your time at PFF, how you've seen it grow, and what you're expecting, what you're hoping to get out of this thing? Because I'm still learning about a lot of these guys too, so this will be a lot of fun.
I think there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff in there. The most interesting stuff with guys, I think, is the sacrifices that people have made in order for this to be a success. Because, like you say, this all started off as a hobby. This was Neil doing this in his spare time just because he wanted to see the results. Then he realized he needed help. So Neil put up the money for this. Neil was bankrolling this whole enterprise. The only reason we could do it early is because we were guys who were straight out of college, who didn't have wives or families or overheads. You know, we didn't have an awful lot of bills to pay. And Neil was able to throw us enough money per game to keep our heads above water. So, you know, myself and Ben fell into that category. Khaled was doing stuff for longer without any money whatsoever because he had a job that could cover him for a summer until some money started to roll in. Ian, I think, was doing almost all of the IT stuff for years with no kind of money coming back to him just because he wanted to be involved in this and saw the potential of where it could go. You know, and everyone else that's joined since has had to have some kind of sacrifice in terms of how hard they're working, how much free time is being taken up, how much stuff they're doing for the love of it as opposed to the money, you know, and then accept that even when you are on full time early on, you're not earning the kind of money you want to earn because the company wasn't able to afford it. So, you know, I think that's one stream that's going to come through all of this, is the sacrifices everyone had to make for the love of football and for the love of what we were trying to do at PFF and get this up and running to the point where we're now a successful company.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I do think that's what's going to come out of it. You know, we take a lot of people like what we do, appreciate what we do. So we take some heat sometimes. I think that all comes with the territory. And to the people that give us heat or, you know, are anti-PFF because you get some of that, the same thing that brought me to the company, which was that, wow, you guys are just bringing a different level of understanding and context to the game. That's really the heart and passion of what we do. And as you said, the sacrifices that people have made, everybody's worked 18-hour days, not just one day, but multiple days in a row, 18 hours, where it's wake up, work, sleep, nonstop to either get something done, to envision something for the future. And we were so small for a while that we couldn't even advance the company. Even to just make a change to our signature stats would take months. And it'd be like, hey, put this on call for Ian to do in 3 months here, because we were such a small company. And the sacrifices that people make, absolutely a major part of the story. And we did it just because, the way I describe it, we were just looking for the truth in every play, in every football play. Why did this play work? Why did it fail? And then you add it up in the end, essentially. And you say, okay, this guy's pretty good. This guy, contributed this way. This guy contributed a different way. I think that whole story is the heart of PFF. And a lot of us did work for little money. A lot of people still working for little money because of the passion that they have to provide value to fans, to teams, to broadcast, whatever it may be. And I do feel like that's why we've been able to put a little bit of a dent in the football world as Pro Football Focus. So I'm excited about this whole series. I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and we'll dive into so many different stories and different people that have made things work along the way. And hopefully our listeners can relate to some of the different characters that we will pull up, because a lot of times PFF gets pigeonholed as this, company that says PFF says this, PFF says this. And Sam, we fight quite a bit. There's a lot of internal fighting and arguing and people being pissed off at each other and people hanging up on phone calls about top 101s. I mean, we've had a lot of history of that. It's not just one big, it's a happy family, but happy families fight and have their arguments and dogs bark and things happen. So look, it's going to be a lot of fun. We'll get into all of it this entire series. And we want to get your feedback too. If there's something you guys want to hear about, have any questions about where PFF has come from, evolved, where we're going, please hit us up on Twitter at PFF_Sam or at PFF_Steve, and we will try to loop it right into the podcast. But I think, about 5 or 6 weeks, we'll get through all this and have some fun with it.
Yeah. No, I think the big thing is questions. We know our take of the story, but if there's stuff you want to learn about, stuff you want to ask about PFF's history, fire questions, and we'll see if we can fold that in.
Yep. So this will be the place to do it. Get all of your questions. Hit us up on Twitter. And again, appreciate all of the support for the podcast. It's off-season fun time, but we hope you guys stick with us for the entire off-season, because next season is going to be even bigger. The off-season, we're going to have a lot of fun. Be sure to keep subscribing, keep downloading every single week. Give us the old 5-star review on iTunes or wherever you may be rating podcast because that does us so many favors. So appreciate all the support. We're setting records with the podcast. We owe it all to our fans. So please stick with us all spring and summer. And we'll get into the story with Neil Hornsby next week. So be sure to tune in to that. Until then, everybody have a good one.